I know. Prager U is an extraordinarily easy target. They have no original opinions, they have no arguments, they just get some right-wing talky people on to talk about smart people-y stuff for about 5 minutes per video. Not even 5 minutes, this video can't even reach 1 sargon long, to make people feel like their opinions have some kind of weight behind them. Feel like their opinions about, oh, the West is the best, capitalism's good, make it feel like it has some kind of backing to it, or like, the opinion that this makes a difference. So Prager U is easy, but why don't we sit down for a bit and just dunk on them for fun? Because it's fun, and because it's annoying to see them tout their opinions constantly about how right they think they are, about how, right-wing, or how right-wing they are, and how correct they're not. So I've picked one out that is absolutely delicious today. It's called Sex Matters. First I thought they meant, like, fucking matters, and I was like, well, that sure is a video that you could make. But no. Let's see what they have to offer.
Have you ever pushed a beach ball underwater? What happens? It pops right back up. Because of its nature, a beach ball will not stay submerged.
Oh, I get it. It's like, because beach balls have air in them, and men have testosterone in them, or supposedly cis men, because they're ignoring the fact that trans men usually do as well. Because cis men have testosterone in them and beach balls have air in them, they have to do certain things because that's how hormones work. We're not oversimplifying it all.
The same is true for men and women.
Yep, I called it right before he said it.
Each has a distinct nature that will always rise to the surface.
I wonder if they think about how easily this argument goes towards racism. Actually, I was about to think, oh, do they think that about black and white people? And then I realized that they do. They just recognize that that's not acceptable to say. For the same reason that the myths about non-white people being uncivilized were made up to justify quote-unquote civilizing them, or, colonizing them, so are the same myths about men and women made up. They say that men are more violent, women are more submissive, so that they can justify men being violent and trying to make women be submissive.
Simply put, men and women are different. They look different. They have different body parts, different biology, different hormones. They express emotions differently. They have different needs and desires.
I will bet everything that I own that he will not give any sources, and he will not look at any cases that defy these boundaries. Even the first one, people who look different, he's not even going to consider the possibility that people can be androgynous. He's not going to talk about intersex people. He's not going to talk about how people can transition from most of these to the other. People can change their body parts and their hormones and the way they look and then emotions and so on. That's a stupid point to even argue. People change how they express their emotions. It's such a stupid assertion to make that it's difficult to argue with. That men and women express emotions differently. How do they express them differently? How is this a universal thing? What do you even mean? It's so vague that I don't even know what he's talking about when he says men and women express emotions differently. Is he talking about the fact that men tend to react with violence more than women do? Does he think that's biological? Does he like being biologically violent? Oh, like I said before, it's a justification to be violent most of the time. If a certain group of people is naturally something, they have to all be that thing, or at least have very, very few fringe cases where there is a reason why it is not the case. For example, humans are naturally group-oriented. We like being around each other. We don't like being alone for long periods of time. And even if we are somewhat alone, we still have interactions with other people. That is a natural part of being a human, is wanting companionship. There are very, very few people who are actually hermits, and it's usually some kind of reason. Or, people with personality disorders, like schizoid personality disorder, will somewhat undermine that need for other people. That's something that is natural. if men are naturally more violent, and I assume that's what he means when he says expresses emotions differently, like women will cry and men will get angry. I suppose that's what he means. It's not what he said, but he's probably not going to say it. If men are naturally more violent and women are more likely to cry, why is there such a huge difference? Why do I know so many men, and I'm talking about cis men as well, just need to clarify because obviously that's what he's talking about. Why do I know so many cis men who are more likely to cry than get angry? Why do I know so many cis women who are more likely to get angry than to cry? Why is it only a very, slight difference? If it's such a natural difference, why isn't it more ubiquitous?
Now, if you told that to your great-grandmother who never went to college, never used an iPhone, never used social media,
but grew up in a patriarchy,
she would have asked, why are you telling me something so obvious? But if you said the same thing to a graduate student in sociology or anthropology,
who is learning about the social causes of these things, that the science, sociology, that means the science of society, they have learned about the causes of this, whereas your grandma did not. She grew up in the early 20th century when gender roles were all the fucking rage.
Let alone gender studies, they'd say you were wrong. Men and women are basically the same, the grad student would say.
I don't understand why he's making the argument that having a college education, people who don't have a college education are smarter than people with a college education. I guess the point is that it's natural and that college is trying to make you unlearn these things. But I have to okay, I remember when I was in physics class, my teacher was talking about how when two cars going at 100 miles an hour, when they smash into each other, the force of that crash will be 200 miles per hour, right? And no one got that intuitively. It was not natural for them to grasp the idea that two cars going at 100 miles per hour will have their crash force will be 200 miles per hour. Or whatever the crash was. I took it a couple of years ago, I don't remember. That no one got that intuitively. But it was still correct. A fact of physics was correct without being intuitive. A fact of society, that men and women are basically the same, can also be correct without being intuitive. And sociology, the study of society, has found that. For the most part, obviously people disagree, but that is what sociology has found. I was expecting this to be stupid, but I'm kind of blown away by how stupid it actually is.
Sexuality exists on a spectrum. It's determined by people's internal feelings. Between great-granny...
Okay, that almost slipped by me that he was drawing a distinction between... not drawing a distinction between gender and sexuality. He's trying to imply they're the same thing. I don't understand how anyone thinks this, but okay, whatever the fuck your name is. I wasn't listening when he said what his name is.
And the gender studies PhD. I'm going with Granny and her common sense. To believe
fucking common sense, alright.
That men and women are basically the same is to believe a delusion.
Says who? Says Jung? I find their extreme overuse of the delusion thing, for one, really annoying. It's also ableist, but that's kind of obvious. But it's also, I guess it's wishful thinking, that they want to think that everyone who doesn't agree with them is just deluded. And if we're going to talk about delusional in the colloquial sense of, just trying to believe something that isn't true, that's the most deluded thing I can think of. It's just believing that everyone who doesn't agree with you is deluded. And no matter who makes that argument, that everyone who's wrong is deluded, I disagree with that. I think that everyone believes, or for the most part, not everyone, but most people believe that they have a legitimate reason to think the thing they do. Like, for example, this guy here, I'm tapping on my screen. He's off the screen. But this guy here thinks that he has a legitimate reason to think that men and women are different in the fact that he thinks he's observed a major difference. Like, he trusts, I guess, his own eyes more than science. But, those kids that trusted their own eyes more than science in physics class were still wrong, and so is he.
A delusion is a belief that contradicts reality. You can say you're Napoleon, but that doesn't make you Napoleon.
Yeah, and you can say that you're right, and that doesn't make you right, whatever the fuck your name is, Mr. Prager Jr.
You can try to socialize girls into behaving like boys or boys into behaving like girls.
You can try and force trans boys into behaving like girls, and you can try and force trans girls into behaving like boys, and that's not how it works. Oh, that's not what you're talking about, is it?
But it won't work. You can push the beach ball underwater, but not for long. New York pediatrician George Lazarus tells the story of a couple who didn't want their young daughter to conform to the usual pink and blue stereotype.
His face is really annoying me. Like, he's kind of got... I don't know what it is. He doesn't look okay.
So they bought her a set of toy trucks. The father went to her room to check on her, and she told him to be quiet. The trucks were sleeping.
It's a normal child thing for all children to make believe. I don't know why this is a specifically girly thing, because I have 3 nephews. They all do similar kinds of things to this.
A similar story about his twin daughters pretending their daddy truck was carrying the baby truck was told by the former president of Harvard University, Lawrence Summers. Give a little boy a truck, or just about any other object, and sooner or later, he will turn it into a weapon.
Source? I think I said earlier that I extraordinarily doubted that he was going to bring any sources. Like, right now he's just saying, well, if you do it yourself, you'll see that's the case. But I know children, and I know that this isn't the case, so that's kind of... The strength of his argument is, well, it's what I see, and if you look, that's what you'll see. But it's not what I see, and it's probably not what most people see. So, this is how thin the argument is. This is what I mean when I say that Prager U is an easy target.
That's reality. Believing delusions makes people say and do foolish, self-destructive things.
Is he ever going to provide any kind of proof that this is delusion? Because basically his argument is, this is the way that things are. Look for yourself. If you think otherwise, you're deluded, right? And if you look for yourself and don't see what he sees, then that's it, the argument falls through. But I mean, Prager U isn't trying to convince anyone, they're just furthering the echo chamber that is the majority of the right wing anyway. So that's kind of where this falls through. And I mean, I guess I can appreciate the fact that he hasn't made his point, boys have penises, girls have vaginas, because that's just like the easiest point to make it. Well, he's probably going to get there at some point, but he hasn't gotten there yet. Instead, he's trying to argue for a more sophisticated point of sort of a biological mental nature. He's trying to be more sophisticated, but he's still falling back on the, if you don't agree with me, you're just deluded argument.
Here's an example. If men and women are basically the same, they want the same things from sex, right? But this isn't true. Women tend to be far more selective about partners with whom they choose to be intimate. That's female nature. Men tend to be, shall we say, far less discerning. That's male nature.
Okay, 2 points to make here. 1, this is to some degree a hormonal thing, and that can be found... So this is actually a little bit true, but it's, it's what he does when they grab a grain of truth and bury it in a bunch of lies. They make a bunch of lies with a grain of truth in them to try and make it sound good. So there is some degree of truth. This is hormonal, and in people who have, trans people who have gone through hormone therapy will often find that this changes. A lot of people, more like trans women, will often say that they have found themselves being more selective, and trans men will say that... trans men don't tend to say that they're less selective, but they will say, they've just gotten hornier. But this, I want to ask what he thinks of the fact that men can be asexual, women can have a lot of sex. This is what I mean. He's never going to address any fringe cases. There is somewhat of a tendency due to hormones in this case, but it's not like a universal truth. And I honestly thought he was going to go into a heteronormative thing about, men want to do the fucking and women want to be fucked, but I guess that's too gross even for the bottom of the barrel shit, like Prager U.
Once, this was considered common sense. Nobody had to go to graduate school or do an academic study to figure it out.
I know what's bothering me. He's just so fucking condescending. Does his audience realize how condescending he's acting, or is it because they agree with him and they're also condescending towards these people that it doesn't irk them? Because he's seriously irks me.
But now everything is upside down. We're trying to push the beach ball underwater.
My big question is, who is trying to do this? Who is trying to force people to go against the way that they actually want to act? So that's the thing, they are acting like someone is doing this to other people, when actually it's other people not acting within those expectations because they don't want to. Yeah, they're trying to argue that we are masculine or feminine for biological reasons. But if we were masculine or feminine for biological reasons, then no one would be gender non-conforming. Because if masculinity and femininity were natural, everyone would be masculine and feminine, and that's not the case, so they have to come up with an excuse why that isn't the case. So they make up this enemy that doesn't exist, but they can't mention that enemy too much. They can kind of be vague about it. They say it's universities, it's the left, or it's third-level education, which, you know, if you think about it, is kind of a bit of a self-dunk a bit. But they can't be too clear about who the enemy is. They can't name people, because then their followers could look into those people and find that that's not what those people actually think, because no one thinks that. People are just naturally variant. People are some degree of naturally masculine or feminine and some degree of societal push. It's both. And that's the case with most things. It's usually some degree of both. In this case, society pushes people somewhat towards being masculine and feminine, but people also have a natural inclination. So those super feminine girls have both the natural inclination and the societal push. Super masculine boys, both. But people who are kind of in between are probably naturally in between, or naturally tend away from their societal push.
Today, male and female college students who, 50 years ago, lived in separate buildings and had supervised curfews, now share the same dorm rooms and even the same bathrooms.
Why is that a problem?
And sex, well, it's just another form of college entertainment. It means nothing and has no consequences.
So he just took a wild, random tangent into sex, the act, which is what I thought this was about. He went from sex as in male or female to sex as in fucking people, just as a wild tangent. But okay, I guess the title works on two levels.
Emotionally, psychologically, or physically.
Sex means a lot to me. It doesn't have to mean a lot to everyone. I don't give a shit what other people do with their lives. That's my big question, is why does he give a shit how much sex people have? Is he, like, jealous? I mean, as long as they're not hurting anyone else, then who cares? He's jealous that in his day, he couldn't get a lot of sex, and then these days it seems like everyone's fucking, everyone's got Tinder and Grindr and shit, and he wishes he had a Grindr back in his day.
But certainly, as far as most women are concerned, this just isn't true.
I don't know where he's getting this from, he's just kind of asserting it. But I mean, that's the whole thing about Prager U, it's why it's so easy. They just assert a bunch of stuff, they don't have any backup for 99% of what they say.
If sex doesn't mean anything, why would any woman feel violated by an uninvited touch?
What a bad... Oh god, that's such a gross argument. I need a minute to process how hot this piping hot take is. How hot, it's like as hot as the center of the sun take. Ugh. There's so much to unpack here, but I kind of just want to throw away the whole suitcase. But I can't go on without addressing this. This is, oh god, hang on. Sex doesn't mean anything morally. It doesn't have to mean anything emotionally if you're not that kind of person. It shouldn't mean any physical consequences in terms of, you know, getting an STD or something, or getting pregnant when you don't want to be pregnant. It shouldn't mean anything in that sense. But we're not talking, when we talk about how bad rape is, the problem is not the sex. The problem is the consent. The problem is that you force someone to do something against their will. And in the case of rape, that something is incredibly personal. Sex doesn't have to mean anything, but it can, and it usually does to some degree. And when people say sex doesn't mean anything, they mean it doesn't mean anything morally. They don't mean it is literally nothing to have sex. It is a personal thing to do. It is a personal thing. It's an extraordinarily personal thing. You are giving access to your body to someone. And someone taking that from you is traumatizing. That's another reason that rape is so bad. It traumatizes you, sometimes for life. People who were touched as children never recover for the most part. Being sexually assaulted will affect you the rest of your life. There may not be a logical reason for that, but it's the case. It is extremely traumatizing. Sex not having any moral implications doesn't mean that consent can be ignored, because those are completely separate topics, and I seriously hope that no one watching this video for serious reasons, like actually agreeing with it, thinks that that's the same thing, thinks that moral implications to having sex and how bad rape is, how much it traumatizes you and violates your bodily autonomy, and how horrible a violation of your bodily autonomy is. I hope no one thinks that's the same thing. Fuck you, Prager University. You're not a fucking university either. Shut up. Your fucking delusions of grandeur, if you want to talk about delusions.
Do you think a man whose leg is touched by a woman he doesn't know feels as violated as a woman does when her leg is touched by a man she doesn't know?
Probably. In most cases, yeah. I would feel incredibly uncomfortable and upset if a random woman just started putting her hands all over me. I think most men would. Prager Unscientific. Prager Unscientific is doing all of its viewers a disservice, because a lot of these viewers are young conservative men. And if these young conservative men get raped in their lifetime, or get sexually assaulted, or get sexually harassed, or any of these things that they're delegitimizing with this part of the video here, if these things happen to those men, they're going to feel like it's wrong of them to dislike it. It's wrong of them to hate it. You know, men can't get raped. Men can absolutely get sexually harassed, sexually assaulted, and raped by anyone. You are allowed to feel uncomfortable if someone touches you in a way you don't like, because it is your body, and you should have every right to decide what you do with your body. And violating that, when someone violates your right to your own body, it is traumatizing, and it feels bad. It feels horrible. And some people can brush it off, maybe, I don't know, but I certainly couldn't, and I wouldn't expect anyone to. And the fact that Prager U expects every man to be able to brush it off is seriously doing a disservice to the men that are watching this. I hope that no one watching this has been a victim of sexual assault and has felt like, you know, Prager U has kind of forced them to feel like they are wrong to feel bad about their sexual assault. It's okay. It's normal to want control of your own body, and it's normal to hate when someone takes that control away from you.
If sex doesn't mean anything, why did Jennifer Lawrence say to The Hollywood Reporter after filming an intimate scene with her co-star Chris Pratt in the movie Passengers, "I knew it was my job, but I couldn't tell my stomach that. That was the most vulnerable I've ever been."
Sex doesn't have to mean anything, and I guess they're making the point. They're trying to use this to say that sex does matter, sex does mean things. And I mean, for a lot of people it does. Like I said, for me it does. For this guy it probably does. For Jennifer Lawrence it does. Assuming that that's the case. But again, you know what? Fuck you. I've already said it's fuck you, Prager Unscientific. Fuck you.
She felt vulnerable in that scene, but not in others, because she knows even acting out in a movie scene, sex is a big deal. That's one of the many reasons it has traditionally been confined to marriage, and why experience and research shows that sex within marriage is more satisfying emotionally, psychologically, and physically.
I have a couple of questions. Firstly, where's this research that you're talking about? You said something about research shows. I'm not seeing the research. I'm not seeing any sources. You didn't even say sources in description or anything. It's not even worth checking, to be honest. I'll check. You know what? I'll check. I'll check and see if there's any sources here. Oh, his name's Scene. Okay. Oh, he's got the whole script here. Or some of it, anyway. But nope, no sources. I'm not seeing any sources for that comment.
Not to mention spiritually, than sex outside of marriage. Anyone who tells you that men and women are basically the same and that sex means as little to women as it can to many men.
They've tried to make a sneaky argument under the table that sex doesn't mean anything to most men. Fucking source? Like, they just say shit. They just say shit. They just say things, and then they don't bother coming up with any sources, any explanations, any sort of backing up. They just say shit. God fucking damn it.
Is not telling you the truth. They're making stuff up.
The self-awareness, the irony. The irony. He's just saying shit. He's just making shit up. It's kind of creepy, the way that they are just so quick to say that any dissenting opinion is making shit up. Any dissenting opinion is false, is deluded. When they don't have any kind of... They haven't bothered to show you any kind of proof of what they're saying, any kind of sort, anything. But they're just saying, here's the truth. If you don't like it, or if you disagree, you're deluded and making shit up. It's kind of creepy when you think about it. It's very creepy. I don't like it.
They're pushing an agenda. Theirs, not yours.
You mean not yours?
So, trust Granny, trust common sense, and remember the beach ball.
Trust this smug motherfucker. Don't trust science.
I'm Sean McDowell, Associate Professor of Theology and Philosophy at Biola University for Prager University.
Are you a professor of sociology? No. So shut up about sociology. You don't know anything about the science of society, you only know about the science of God and asking questions. Shut up. Well, that was fun.